So I think I want to start off with, how the heck did you become so knowledgeable on all things adaptogens and just health and wellness as a whole? Yeah, I love to hear people's stories. I think it kind of sets the tone for everything we do. So if you wouldn't mind just giving that intro, I'd really appreciate that.
Of course, I had the good fortune really to be born into a family that was already kind of ahead of its time and quite wellness focused. Not perfect by any means, but who is? We all just are out there doing our best with the information and resources that we have. But my parents raised me in the 90s as a vegetarian. Not necessarily a super healthy one, but it was kind of like the best they knew with the information they had at the time. So it was like white rice, basmati rice, and tofu 5 nights a week. And one night a week was pizza, and one night a week was pasta. And that kind of went on for many, many, many years. And I always did pretty well in school, pretty well in sports, but there was always that upper echelon of ultra high performers that I couldn't ever quite figure out how to break into in either of these kind of departments of my life, so to speak. And I knew my food was different from everybody else. So it's like, is this all these guys are performing higher than me? They're eating differently than me. Maybe does that have anything to do with it? I don't know. I don't really want to change. But eventually, my parents had a wellness center, and they were, like I said, ahead of their time. They had infrared saunas back, in the early 2000s, before anybody was talking about this kind of stuff. They had infrared heated jade massage beds. They had naturopathic doctors consulting with people there, and they were selling some kind of like supplement and superfood type products. And I started seeing a lot of people coming through and having radical transformations in their lives as I was, just a teenager working the front desk. And I was really excited by that because I was hearing so much of this Eastern philosophy during that time, in the sense of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of a cure, in the sense that you want to get ahead of your health, promote your health actively before you get sick, and then you don't have to deal with getting sick later. But as much as all the people that I saw coming in there would parrot the same kind of sayings and did sincerely believe in it, I made this realization or made this connection that they weren't actually doing that. Were all coming in their 40s, 50s, 60s with back pain, liver issues, prostate issues, bad sleep, blood pressure issues, all this stuff. They were all getting better. They were all experiencing amazing transformations. But they had waited until they got sick to actually do something about it. They were treating it holistically, which is way better than the alternative in many cases, but they hadn't actually followed that principle with these things. So it got me thinking, okay, if they're having such amazing results, even though they waited to get sick, what happens if I start this now at the ripe old age of 14? What does that mean for the overall, like my overall life experience? How long can I stay healthy? How long can I live in total? What amount more of life experiences can I pack into this lifetime if I get on it? And I didn't have really any examples of anybody who had done that until one day this gentleman from the local community came in. His name was Tom, and he was the first example of something like this. He was in his 40s, looked like he could be in his 20s though. He was super intelligent, absolutely jacked, and he had this protein powder mix that he was bringing to see if they would sell there. And it was like hemp protein with some spirulina, chlorella, some other Western herbs like milk thistle, and you had astragalus in there as something I highly regard to this day as a great adaptogen. And I thought, okay, this guy tells me he's having this as two of his meals out of the day. I'm going to try this. I want to see if I can get those same kind of results because this is the first time I've seen anybody being a living example of what I had in mind that maybe could be possible. So I didn't know what I was doing. I would blend up this mix every day, twice a day, with some Tropicana orange juice, some frozen berries, a frozen banana, and it tasted pretty rough. But I didn't care. I was going to get those benefits. So I would stick a straw down to the back of my throat and just suck this thing down, trying to bypass my taste buds. And I noticed after a couple of weeks, I was feeling this amazing high from drinking this. Not like a cannabis high, but just an incredible, alive, awake clarity that I had never experienced before. And it got me thinking, if this has been out there all this time and I've been missing out on it, what else have I been missing out on? So I started really deeply researching everything that was in there. And then the more that I read about, the more I wanted to try some of these things in higher doses individually. And the more I did that, the better I would feel. Then I would learn more about different ingredients. And the more I would learn about these other ingredients, the more I would want to consume new and better things. And it just, the better I would feel, the more new stuff I would do, the more new stuff I would do, the better I'd feel. And just like this cycle continued, and it motivated me to learn as much as I possibly could. And that cycle never really stopped. And so eventually it got to the point where a couple of years later, now I'm in college, and you can only do something that's really beneficial for you for such a long period of time before you want to share it with other people. It's the natural hero's journey. You go out and slay your personal dragon, and then you want to come back and share the gold and the lessons learned with your community. Problem was, my community at that time was my college friends. It was the height of the opioid epidemic. They were far more interested in having Oxycontins and Percocets than they were in going anywhere near anything that I would call a superfood or an adaptogenic herb or chocolate or anything. So I was really hesitant. I was mostly just keeping it to myself, trying to have friendships, still go party. I would show up to the party with my own chocolate blended drink with all kinds of euphoria and inducing herbs in there, just doing my own thing. Everybody thought I was a little bit odd, I think, but what can you do? And eventually I was on a surf trip with a couple of my closest friends, and we went to Costa Rica, and they would go out surfing. We'd go out surf together. And after 2 hours, they'd want to come back in. They'd be tired. They'd be hungry. They want to rest. And I'd want to stay out for 4, 5, 6 hours. Like, guys, it's amazing out here. The water is warm. The sun is shining. The waves are perfect. And they saw, like I saw when I was a kid, okay, other people are eating different stuff than me. What's the difference here? They saw that I was quietly in the corner of the hotel room, had brought my little magic bullet blender and was blending up these weird brown drinks all day long. And they finally asked, like, hey, could you maybe make me one of those before we go back out in the water again? And this is quietly the moment I'd been waiting for, right? So I had to kind of contain my excitement, play it cool. Like, yeah, I can make you one. And the problem was, I'd been doing this for so many years, I forgot how bad it tasted because I'd gotten totally used to it. So 2 out of the 4 of them were throwing up within minutes afterwards because they were so toxic from the whole college experience. When you take something that's powerfully detoxifying and you have a lot of toxicity on board, sometimes your body mobilizes those toxins back out right the way they came in. And so they were in the bathroom doing their thing, and like nobody was enjoying it. And it was really a moment of realization for me, because I realized, okay, if I'm going to really share this with anybody else and have a long-term serious benefit to the world beyond just my own health and wellness, I have to figure out a better way to do this. And I had the goal at that point. I want to figure out a way to share the healthiest ingredients in the world with people in a way that's so delicious and such an amazing food experience. They want to consume the food and drinks that I make just because it's such an amazing experience, and it just so happens to be massively healthy as an afterthought.
Yeah, that's wow. Okay, there's a lot of different avenues I want to take that. But first off, just going back to, yeah, it's pretty wild how quickly the taste buds can change and adapt to what you're consuming. And then just the experience of your friends literally like having to vomit from the healthy smoothie that they're essentially drinking. It reminds me of like the keto flu, for example, where
Yeah.
people all of a sudden go keto for the first time and they've never done any kind of healthy lifestyle diet change ever, and then it's all of these toxins being released and yeah, essentially making them sick. But I want to actually backtrack even a little bit further to the vegetarian diet. So your parents starting with the vegetarian diet, where did that stem from? I know like my mom, for example, was pretty big on white meat only and then pretty heavy on veggies, which was awesome. But I think that was just kind of like the style at the time, especially like the low fat, high carb kind of style dieting. Was it something along those lines, or was there other influence?
It was kind of a spiritual thing for them in large part. They were on a strong spiritual path. They were devotees of an Indian guru named Baba Muktananda. They spent a lot of time in India and were very influenced by these traditions. They also, even from like my mom when she was a teenager, she had a kind of an aversion to the concept of meat. Just to be clear, I'm no longer a vegetarian actually, and so I incorporate select animal foods that I have found take me to a higher level of health and I feel are minimally negative in their impact on the other side of the equation. And so I try to take a really non-dogmatic approach to whatever ethical or whatever decision somebody tries to make along those lines for themselves. But yeah, it was, they thought it was healthier, and certainly I think it probably was still healthier to have a vegetarian, probably like higher carb than you'd really want diet, as opposed to, all the other kids were like having Burger King and McDonald's. And I don't think that would have been better. So, given what was around at the time, it was probably one of the best options.
Yeah. The reason I had asked is because going through like my experience with dieting and as well becoming a yoga practitioner, one of the big things is ahimsa and like going vegan and really trying to get away from essentially eating any animal products, which I agree with you, very like non-dogmatic approach to whatever kind of food you eat. I think there's certain foods work better for certain people, maybe even at a certain time in their life. There might be a specific type of diet that's right for you in that moment. So yeah, definitely on board with the non-dogmatic stuff. But I wanted to ask, one of the things I noticed, I never went vegan, but I went very like, I would say almost full on vegetarian,
Yeah.
maybe more so plant based. But one of the big things that I noticed was my teeth seemed to take a pretty big hit from that dietary change. And I'm sure I just wasn't consuming enough of something to, I don't know if it's like K2, calcium, something along those lines. But did you ever notice any issues growing up with like the health of your teeth?
Fortunately, not. Some of the main areas and the pitfalls that people end up with, I didn't really have issues with. I mean, I will say that my bite didn't develop as wide in terms of my upper arch of the palate as would have been ideal. And if my teeth look weird in the video, it's not because I have fake teeth. It's because I have aligners on, because I'm undergoing a whole process right now to try to expand my upper arch and be able to fit everything properly. So that can actually happen from the previous generation not having enough nutrition, and then into my generation as well, and also to do with maybe some food allergies and doing a little too much mouth breathing when I was a kid, going through all that and not having the tongue pushing up against the roof of my mouth on an ongoing basis. So I certainly had some issues in that department in terms of overall strength and mineralization of the teeth. Somehow I ended up doing pretty okay there. I don't know if it would work out the same across a broad group of people. You always have, you could have 100 people do the worst thing ever, and one of them would end up being somehow okay. So fortunately, I got lucky there.
Yeah, no, and that's just a personal question of mine because in general, when you talk about having like not a broad enough palate, I think most people probably don't, just from like you said, mouth breathing, not having the tongue putting the pressure up there. Also, just with all the like processed foods that I know I ate as a kid, there was not much in terms of like difficult consistency to like really chew through. So yeah, that plays a whole role. But this is me going down a path of personal curiosity. So, anyways,
It's
we're gonna
definitely
draw it
true that
back.
it's a common issue for long-term vegans to run into dental issues. So it's not out of the ordinary.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that was one of the most like obvious kind of issues that I found with it. Um, I personally do feel like in my soul more so that I would love to be more plant based, and I do still have like a pretty balanced plate at pretty much every meal. But yeah, I definitely eat protein. But yeah, it's very interesting and super interesting background as well with your parents and you were mentioning as well that they own a infrared sauna company. And so here's my other personal curiosity question: what is the biggest difference between an infrared sauna and just a traditional pour some hot water on some rocks kind of sauna? Like, what are the benefits? What's the main reason for having infrared as opposed to other? The only main difference I can feel is just they're not as hot typically. But beyond that, I'm curious to pick your brain on that.
So I just want to preface it by saying, yes, I am in the infrared sauna business through my family, and so there could be some bias here. First of all, and second of all, I recognize saunas are a very personal and passionate thing for a lot of people, especially Northern Europeans, especially Finnish people, are have very strong feelings about their saunas being the one and only true saunas. So take it easy on me, folks. I'm just sharing my personal experience here. And so the best way I would describe the difference between the two is that in a traditional sauna, you're using hot rocks to heat the air, and then the hot air heats your body. Certainly works. It's been done that way for hundreds, if not thousands of years. The downside is that air doesn't transmit heat all that effectively. It's like you can stick your hand in an oven that's 350, 400 degrees, It's hot, but it's not that big of a deal until you accidentally touch some of the metal in the oven. Then that transmits heat very effectively, and you got a problem on your hands real fast. So, you don't have the most efficiency of transmission of that heat to the body. That's a part of the reason why they're throwing water on the rocks, because as you increase the humidity, that helps to transmit the heat more effectively. If you have a sauna at, say, 180 degrees that has no water being thrown on the rocks versus one with much higher humidity because somebody's tossing the water on the rocks in there, it's a totally different experience. So with infrared, these infrared wavelengths only lose a small percentage of their energy to heating the air in the sauna, and the rest are directly penetrating your tissue to work on increasing your core body temperature, which is the real metric, in my opinion, that you're actually after. Your body, in terms of the biological results that you're going to get, is not as concerned with what temperature the air is or what temperature your skin is getting to, but more what challenge is being placed upon your body's control mechanisms of its core body temperature. Because as it gets hotter and hotter in your core, your body's doing everything it can to cool you off. And it's that push and pull that drives a lot of the benefits that are going to happen. So you can get, in my opinion, in my personal experience, similar results at a different temperature. There's been very limited comparative study done. The only one that I've seen, it was faulty, in my opinion, in the way they studied it, because they looked at an infrared sauna and a traditional sauna at the same temperature and studied what results will it produce for athletic recovery. The infrared sauna outperformed the traditional sauna, but they did it at the same temperature, which you would never really have. You would have a traditional sauna that would be quite a bit hotter. So all of that really shows, I think, is that there certainly is something more to an infrared sauna than just the air temperature.
Yeah, and I would the other noticeable difference is I enjoy sitting at infrared sauna for a longer period of time because it's not just crazy hot and super intense. At least the air, right? So I feel that the benefits as well kind of steep a little bit longer. Like when you're able to sit in there longer, you're able to reap those benefits for a longer period of time. So I really enjoy them, but I was just curious to really get the differentiation on those
Yeah,
two.
even in the world of infrared saunas, there's variants, right? You'll have some that get to 120, 130. You'll have some that get to maybe into the 150s or even popping up into the 160s a little bit. My personal experience is, having used both kinds of saunas a lot, is that an infrared sauna in like the mid 150s is a pretty comparable experience to traditional around 180.
Okay. Okay. Oh, that's super good to note. Um, Moving back into the chocolates. First off, I just got to know, how did you become so knowledgeable on all these different adaptogens? Because there's certain adaptogens that you have in your chocolates that I've never even heard of. If we take the recharge one here, you have something called, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, but eucomia and
Perfect.
remania.
Perfect pronunciation.
Thank you. I appreciate it. But yeah, these are, never heard of those before. So how did you become so knowledgeable on these?
So as I was kind of going off down that rabbit hole of learning more about every healthy ingredient I could possibly get my hands on, I came across this school of Taoist Tonic Herbalism. And this is something that dates back thousands of years. And I was really just taken by the philosophy and the theory of it, the way that it isn't just this herb does that. It intertwines with so many elements of your life. It intertwines with your mentality, it intertwines with your spiritual energy, it intertwines with your physical energy. And they have these amazing structures of how to understand what these herbs are doing. They have in their philosophy the idea of yin and yang, the hot and the cold, the expending of energy and the collecting of energy. And not only that, they have this other thing called the three treasure system. Yin and yang, a lot of people have heard of and have some kind of vague idea. The three treasures, nobody knows about this pretty much. And it is an amazing structure to understand all these herbs and what they're doing. So I'll just, if you don't mind, share a little brief look at it real quick. So they would say that your life is formed of these three treasures. And they would use the metaphor of a candle to describe these. I find it works a little bit better to use a metaphor, a financial metaphor. And so I'll give you both, and everybody can take whichever metaphor works for them. So the wax and the wick of the candle is what's called your jing. This is your core kidney adrenal energy. It is something that you inherit from your parents and your grandparents before them, depending on what their diet was like and how healthy they lived. If you had parents that were not living so well, maybe they had a huge amount of stress, they had a poor diet, lots of grain, not a lot of nutritional density, you're not going to start off necessarily with as much jing as somebody whose parents were, maybe living close to the earth and eating their ancestral diet and just living a close to nature life. So some people start off with more, some people start off with less. It's like we all know people who can do whatever they want. They don't have to live a healthy life and they're still doing pretty well. And they make fun of people who actually have to actively take care of their health until they eventually like run out of this jing at like age 60 because of a heart attack and then it's over. But they were going pretty good until then. On the other hand, you have people who are really kind of sickly from a young age, and no matter what they do, they always have to be really careful about how they're using their energy and how they're taking care of themselves because they're just right on that precipice where it can all fall apart very easily. To the financial metaphor that I said I was going to give you, here, this is your inheritance. It's some people end up with a big fat trust fund from their parents because their parents dominated the financial world. Some people start off with nothing, and you just got to build your way up the old-fashioned way. And so that's the wax and the wick. That's your core kidney adrenal essence. That is something that you can build with certain yoga practices and certain jing building herbs. Things like you mentioned, eucomia, rehmannia, cordyceps, morinda. These are all the herbs. Actually, the chocolate you happen to grab is the recharge chocolate. It's all built around building the jing. So it's a great one to start with. So that's where you start to build the foundation. And it starts out as your trust fund, but then as you go through life, it's then your savings account. It's your energy reserves. You tap into it when you need to, but ideally, you don't want to be reaching into that too much. You want to live more sustainably. You want to build the next treasure, your chi. This is the active part of the candle. It's the flame. It's the moment-to-moment active vitality, energy, cognitive function, immune system function. You build this through through breath work, for example. You build it through a healthy diet. You build it through good sleep. You build it through chi herbs, things like astragalus, cordyceps, asparagus root. Even dipping into the Ayurvedic system, you have ashwagandha, which is a prana tonic, which basically translates over to chi. And so these build your chi. And that's your checking account. That's the active part where you're doing your regular deposits and withdrawals. And if you got a healthy checking account, you don't have to touch your savings account. You can leave that alone for a rainy day when things get super stressful and you have to, once every few years, pull an all-nighter and dip into those reserves. And the faster let me reword that. I should say the more you stress, the worse a diet you live, the more you do alcohol and drugs, etc., the more you are tapping into that jing, into those reserves of energy. And when those eventually run out, that's the end of your life. And so you want to really be careful about how you use that. And you want to focus on building the chi to have a strong active checking account so you don't have to mess with your savings account. But ultimately, the ultimate purpose of life is not just to have a big checking account. The ultimate purpose of a candle is not just to have a big flame. The ultimate purpose of you is not just to have a lot of energy, it's to have a beautiful impact on the world around you. So you have your third treasure. This is Shen. This is your higher self. It's a light in your eyes. It's your spirit. It's your ability to have a beautiful effect on the world around you. So this is the light that the candle gives off. Or in the financial metaphor, if you have a great savings account and a great checking account, what do you do now? You start a nonprofit. This is your ability to really help those around you. And you're not going to have a very successful nonprofit if your personal finances are in total disarray. So you start by building your jing, then your chi, and then you get to your Shen. And so the Shen herbs are things like reishi mushroom would be my absolute favorite. Albizia flower is another great one. Pearl powder is one coming from an oceanic mineral source, basically. And so you can fit these herbs into these different treasures. Some herbs even work on two treasures, and there's a rare few that work on all three, like reishi mushroom, which I briefly mentioned, and schizandra berry. These are two examples of what they call three treasure herbs that can build your jing, chi, and Shen. So they're amazing to incorporate into your life. And so I got just romanticized by this whole philosophy and learning about these different herbs. And every time I would learn about one, I was like, wow, I can't believe I lived this long, didn't know about reishi mushroom, about astragalus, about gynostemma. There's so much power in here. I need to know this information like intuitively, like the back of my hand. And so that just drove me from one to the next. And I just got obsessed and never stopped being obsessed.
That I love that breakdown. That was probably the best breakdown I've heard of that personally. And
Well, thank you.
I love any kind of health and wellness type philosophy that really brings together not just the physical wellness, but also the emotional, the mental, the spiritual wellness, because it all ties together at one point or another. So thanks for breaking that down. That was incredible. you've like inspired me to go and do some more research on it. So thank you for
Awesome.
that. No, Sage, that was excellent. This leads me to my next point, which is why choose cacao, which I'm a huge fan of, and obviously, majority of people love chocolate, but specifically cacao in its raw, bitter state. I really love cacao. Why did you choose that, or even more specifically, I guess, chocolate as your basically the system of delivering these adaptogens and super herbs to people?
There were a couple of driving factors, and so rewind back to my teen years as my parents had the wellness center. And they were selling various products there as well. I noticed eventually one day they had this bag of what looked like cocoa powder on the shelf to me, and it said cacao, which was seemed like a misspelling. So first I was asking my mom, "Hey, did they misspell that?" And she's like, "No, no, that's what it means when it's less processed, basically." And I was still confused because this sounded to me like my only point of comparison to this was like Hershey's hot cocoa that I had growing up with the marshmallows mixed in with the powder. And I knew that wasn't healthy. We would have it as a kid, like every now and then with like hot soy milk, that was the way we were doing it. And I didn't understand why is this amongst all these other incredible things that you guys have here? How did it earn this place? And I started learning more about it, and I realized, okay, wow, this is the highest natural source of antioxidants. Then you look at what mineral are more than 80% of people in the Western world chronically deficient in. The number one deficiency, magnesium. Okay, what's the number one natural source of magnesium? Oh, it's cacao. Wow, that's pretty cool. Then people have all over the place blood sugar issues. What's the mineral that helps, or the trace mineral that helps with blood sugar? Chromium. Incredible source of chromium, cacao. And that's something that like 80+% of people also have major deficiencies in. And then you start learning about some of these other more exotic compounds in there, like phenethylamine, a love bliss chemical, or anandamide, which is another bliss chemical, and things that just make people feel amazing. And I was like, okay, this is pretty cool because this is a rare thing. Most foods that I understood, they're either healthy for you, but nobody generally thinks that they're an amazing food experience, that they really taste good. Or on the other hand, you have foods that people love to eat, but nobody's confusing them with being super healthy for you. It's like the Grand Canyon, this wide divide between these two worlds. And it's kind of like there's this little bridge between the two sides made out of chocolate. Because chocolate, on one hand, and it is something that people crave, right? And on the other hand, if done right, it can be an incredible health food. And so I saw this as a way to achieve my goal that I mentioned earlier of delivering health and wellness to people through an incredible food experience that they would crave and love and eat just because it tasted good and just so happened to be really good for them as an afterthought. And I had a couple other motivating factors. One, I really enjoyed chocolate, and so if there was a way to have it healthier, I wanted it. And a lot of the higher quality cacao and chocolate products at the time were quite expensive, so I thought it'd be better if I could learn to make this myself. And I also thought it would be a fun way to meet girls if you could meet a girl and say, "Hey, want to come over and we can make some chocolate together?" And so eventually that's how I met my girlfriend, who I've been with now for 12 and a half years, and it worked out really well.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on that long relationship.
Thank you.
Yeah, my wife and I actually just hit 12 years in September as well. So that's
Oh, wow,
awesome.
nice. Congrats.
Yeah.
2011,
Thank you.
2012, those are good times.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Good times to meet
2012.
somebody just before, probably like just before dating apps like made everybody's head spin around.
Yeah,
Get
we
out of there
we
just in time.
often. Oh, I mean, we talk about, we're like, it's got to be super weird if we were to like be back in the dating game right now to deal with all the dating apps. Like, I would be completely lost personally, but
Yeah, we're blessed.
yeah, 100%. Now, with the cacao being like super rich in all of these minerals, trace minerals, it's actually one of the foods that I was really big on giving to my dad, who he's dealt with some heart complications in the last. He's gotten so much better, but probably around like 2005, 2006, that's when he started hearing that he was having heart complications, kind of like irregular heartbeats. Part of his heart was enlarged and working harder than the other portion. And I've put him on a few different things, but one of the biggest ones is cacao. He's pretty religious about taking it, and he's seen massive improvements in his heart health. His tests are coming back a lot better. Yeah, it's really awesome. So I'm huge on the power of cacao. I read I think like a superfoods book by David Wolf, and that's where I really learned about cacao and kind of went down that rabbit hole. But you have raw cacao, which I think, or I guess, would cacao be raw and cocoa be the not raw version of cacao?
People interpret it in different ways. Um, there's no official definition and no official delineation between what is cocoa and what is cacao. Really, the differentiation and how it's pronounced, you have to go back to the original times in Central America when the Spanish first arrived, and you had the cacao there at the time, but what they called it was cacuaro, and that was a little too crazy of a word even for the Spanish, and so the Spanish took that and they started saying cacao, and the Spanish took this back to Europe, tried to introduce it to the British. For the British, cacao was too weird, and they made it cocoa. You can get further and further from it, but basically, in the way it's used these days, if you see something that says cacao, it's likely to be on the less processed side, whereas cocoa is something that has had more human intervention gone into what's being delivered to you there.
Yeah. So, and the reason I asked this is because I had the opportunity to go to a cacao and coffee farm in Colombia, in near, I think it was in Minca was the town, and just uh, insane. They had a toucan that they saved when it was a baby. Its tree had and nest had fallen down, and since they rescued it, they didn't want to keep it. They just kind of like wanted to rehabilitate it, but now it just like literally hangs out on the premise there, and
How
they
fun.
feed it. It'll come up, you can pet it. It is a true Colombian toucan because it'll dip its beak into your coffee if you're not drinking it quick enough. Yeah, he's full blown Colombian. But while I was there, I was lucky enough to experience like a cacao or chocolate making process. And so they show that, first off, the cacao pod, which is so unique looking. And then, you have the little seeds inside with the white pulp on them, which is also super tasty. But they would take the seeds with the white pulp and put it in, I think they would put it in a jar. They would ferment it first. And then after it had fermented for a certain period of time, then they put it into a roasting machine and roast it. And then the whole room smells like delicious chocolate. But of course, that's where the raw stage ends. So for raw cacao, you would ferment it. And then what would be the next step after that?
So you're fermenting and then sun drying, and
Okay.
then from being sun dried, what it depends on how far you're going to take it, and what you're planning to make out of it. So let's say you're going all the way to the most processed, so to speak, endpoints of a raw cacao, which would be making cacao powder and cacao butter. So from there, it's going to be crushed into nibs, and then you have people going through it by hand, taking out the skins. And so you just have the beans themselves. So at this point, you have cacao nibs. You could just sell those or eat those at that point. But if you wanted to go further, they go through a very slow stone grinding process to make sure you don't create too much heat as you're stone grinding them, because you could do it a lot faster with a lot more aggressive heat, but that's not what you want. So very slowly stone ground up over a period of a couple days, and that creates cocoa or cacao paste, or the like more mainstream term for this is chocolate liqueur. Um, and so this is basically just the cacao bean turned into basically like a nut butter. It's like you would take an almond and make it into almond butter. You take the cacao bean and you turn it into cacao paste. From this point, you might use that right at that stage to start making chocolate, or you basically put it through a press and you end up pressing it. And so out one end of the machine comes cacao butter, and that is the pure fat of the cacao bean. Out the other end of the machine, you get what's called cake. And this is just cacao powder, highly compressed. And then that basically gets sifted to kind of allow it to separate out and get some air in there and break it, get into smaller particles. And then you have cacao powder.
Wow. Okay. I missed a few steps in there.
No,
But
that's all right.
okay, that makes a lot more sense. And then that was something I really enjoyed about your chocolate, as well as that you keep the cacao butter in there, which a lot of chocolate that you'll find in the markets, they don't have the original cacao butter, or they'll add with the cacao butter some kind of a different kind of fat, like soybean oil or whatever, like fill in the blank. So I really appreciated that you kept that in there, and it gives it that really velvety, just nice mouth feel. And I know when I had that chocolate, even though it wasn't raw, that was one of the things that I noticed was that texture of chocolate was very similar to the one that you have because I'm guessing
Right.
because of that cacao butter in there.
Yeah, and that's something that is um, you're absolutely right that many companies try to minimize the cacao butter in there, and especially so over the past year. And not a lot of people are aware of this, but about a year ago, there was huge El Nino type rains in Africa, where the majority of the world's cacao is produced. They lost pretty much the whole crop due to disease because of how much rain there was. And so when you take away the majority of the cacao supply in the world, suddenly whatever's remaining, whether it's from Africa or from Central or South America or Indonesia, the prices go through the roof. So historically, you could look back like decades and decades and decades. The price stays pretty consistent between like $2,500 and $3,000 per metric ton. And this is just like for commodity basic African cacao. Um, but like whatever cacao you're getting, higher quality is just going to be some multiple of that. So the commodity price affects the price of everything. And so now the price suddenly this year went from between 2,500 to 3,000 historically to up around 10,000. So the prices for the ingredients going into here have basically tripled or quadrupled depending on what start point you pick. And so the most expensive element of cacao processing is the butter. So the more like mainstream type companies are trying to cut this out as much as they can because they're trying to control their costs somehow. We haven't changed our recipes at all in response to this, and we're doing everything we can to try to keep prices under control and keep our quality there. But it's been a crazy year in the cacao world.
Well, yeah, and I think this is a perfect entry point to kind of jump into all of that because I know I saw recently you talking about because you source your cacao from Ecuador, I believe, and
Correct.
there's kind of been a issue there with like the U.S. kind of getting out of there, and then cartels kind of coming in and running amok, and as well, not to mention, you source a really specific type of cacao, which is was it the Arriba Nacional?
Correct. Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
wild grown Arriba Nacional. Yeah.
and wild grown too, which I think for a lot of people listening to this, they don't know that this is a it's like kind of like the is it would you call it like the original strain? Because I know the type that we get is not that Arriba Nacional typically, like in your I don't know Hershey's bar or something like that. Correct?
Right. So Arriba Nacional, this is basically like the heirloom original variety. It represents less than 1% of the total cacao grown in the world.
Crazy.
Most of what is consumed are one of several different hybrids. The main ones are called Trinitario and Forastero, hybridized to grow better and produce more and be more disease resistant in different climates. And then you also have now, in the last couple of decades, becoming more common, especially out of Central and South America, is a variety called a heavily hybridized variety called CCN 51. And this is an embarrassment of a cacao tree. It produces huge yield, but the quality is crap. It's known for having
Oh,
the flavor of acidic dirt, and unfortunately, more and more farmers are turning to it because they can, in the short run, make more money. But the everything about it and the way it has to be grown with huge amounts of protection. It has to be grown obviously monocropped on a plantation, and it's these small trees that are just producing in many ways an inferior cacao. We are obsessive, as you can probably already tell by listening to me up until this point. So we go for the absolute highest quality and we'll take nothing less. So that sometimes makes our life really difficult because most other companies, if something becomes challenging with the country or source of origin of your cacao or whatever, there's a dozen other countries you can go to. You can go figure something else out. We have, for better or for worse, I think in the long run for better, but we have pigeonholed ourselves into only accepting a cacao that's wild grown heirloom, grown in volcanic soil, organic, of course, but beyond that, mycotoxin free, which is mold toxins that are present in almost every chocolate product in the world. And so, because of this, over the last year, when the political and economic situation in Ecuador got pretty dicey, it wasn't so easy as saying, okay, let's go to the country next door. Let's just go to Peru and get something from there. Because the kind that we're getting, this level of quality only happens in Ecuador.
yeah. Well, is Ecuador known as like the home place of cacao?
There's a couple different opinions. Anytime you're tracing something back to its origins, there's a lot of
Yeah.
national pride involved.
Yeah.
And so there may be some origins in Central America. Pretty much any country in Central and South America where cacao comes from, people will tell you that's where it originally came from. So it's a little bit hard to say, but it's around there.
Yeah. 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 Gotcha. But to that point, I mean, all of the points that you listed on your cacao is insane. It's top of the line. It's the type of cacao that I've been looking for a long time, and happy to find your company, Addictive Wellness, and literally meeting all the boxes, ticking them off, and like not even just stopping at organic and Arriba Nacional, volcanic grown, but then also the mycotoxin free. That's a huge one. That's a big point. That's, I think, becoming more well known. Is this mycotoxin with like coffee and cacao? So incredible. But what was kind of the issue with your sourcing of cacao? Obviously, you have to get it from specifically there, but what was the issue with kind of like the cartels and their involvement and lack of U.S. involvement, I guess?
Yeah, so going back a little ways, the U.S. used to have a military base in Ecuador, and that had a kind of a nice ripple effect in the sense of the cartels tend to keep some distance from the U.S. military because that's the only more badass group of people on the block uh, with bigger weapons. So that things were good during those times in many ways, but Ecuador, they got a leader involved who said, "No more Americans. We don't want you here anymore. No more colonization or whatever you want to try to say that this is." And so the Americans said, "Okay, fine, we'll leave. No problem. See you guys later. We got the whole rest of the world to go hang out with." And so they left, and right in came the cartels, and they got really powerful in Ecuador, and it's very tied to the cocaine trade. The next thing that happened was this past year or earlier this year, the president said, "We are declaring a state of emergency and declaring war on the cartels because the cartels had gained so much power." The cartels didn't just roll over and said, "Okay, come get us." They said, "Okay, you're going to declare war on us. We will declare war back on you. Let's go." And violence went through the roof from one day to the next. You had groups of armed gangsters storming into live TV broadcasts, and basically it almost like that thing from the pirate movie where he says, I'm the captain now, like I'm your broadcaster now." Really gnarly. And the violence, it became so crazy, and the extortion that just happened with just like common people on the street being told, "Pay me this crazy amount of money or I'm going to kill you right now," and they say, "I don't have that money." It's okay, I will kill you now. Just insanity. And so the result of this was our cacao is not grown on farms. It's not grown somewhere that's easy to get to. And so people have to go to somewhat remote regions. People weren't very excited to travel when you have these marauding gangsters all over the place. So it's hard to get people to go and harvest cacao from these areas where it grows in the wild, in the rainforest. And then hard to get them to transport it back because you had the colliding things happening at the same time. You have incredible amounts of violence and people trying to take advantage of the less well protected, I suppose you could say, in Ecuador. And at the same time, you have skyrocketing cacao prices. So now anybody transporting cacao in their vehicle, it's like transporting gold there. So cacao transport was becoming targets for armed robbery on the highway. And so for most of this year, we hadn't been able to get any processing done there, hadn't been able to get any shipments out. And with our partners there, we actually earlier in the year did have a whole production, a whole thing ready to go, a whole shipment ready to go out. One of the people involved with the factory saw the whole situation that was going on with the skyrocketing cacao prices, the difficulty harvesting, and basically decided to cash out. He went on the side and sold off all the inventory, all the machinery, everything. And there's nothing. And so the cacao that was supposed to, come back in the spring and last us through most of the rest of the year never came. So it's been just like working so hard trying to get it harvested, trying to get it processed, and we have to have it processed to very specific standards to maintain all these properties that we are so proud of with our chocolate and our cacao. So finally, we got it produced and then had to figure out how to get it here. And nobody wants to ship in terms of international shipping companies out of Ecuador right now for all the same reasons. And so DHL wanted to charge us some insane prices to get the product over. They wanted to charge us like 3x the value of the product itself, which is just a total non-starter. Fortunately, we managed to get a good discounted, like last minute deal with FedEx. As of now, we got about half the shipment delivered last week, which I'm over the moon about because it means we will have chocolate for Black Friday customers. The other half is still sitting in Ecuador and has no tracking updates for the past week and a half. So I'm a little bit concerned still. Still, the drama is not totally over. But to know that we will have chocolate for people for the holidays, I am so relieved.
Yeah, and also massive thank you from myself, my wife, everyone else who enjoys your chocolate, because you're really providing something incredibly unique and in many ways supporting the continued growth of Arriba Nacional and supporting that whole process. So your headache, I promise, is it's not for nothing. It's very greatly enjoyed, and I appreciate it so much. If you need me to run down to Ecuador, I will do whatever I can
Thank
to
you.
help
Thank
get
you.
that up here. No, I was in.
And the thing, just to quickly interject, based off of something you just said, is that, and a lot of people don't think of this, but when you consume this kind of cacao, you're actually protecting the rainforest because you're incentivizing these people to be good stewards of the rainforest. A lot of people are incentivized to cut it down for logging, to cut it down for mining. Here, you're making the most lucrative thing for people to protect that rainforest where this wild cacao grows. That is not necessarily true of cacao grown on a plantation. So this is like, it has other positive ripple effects that most people don't even know.
Yeah, because this cacao is essentially, it's just like you said, it's wild harvested. So this is not planted and then, taking out other native plants to then put cacao here. This is wild grown cacao. I mean, it's biodynamic on the next level, essentially, right? Like this is the best that it gets.
It's right. It's hard to imagine anything better. And
Yeah.
once you start having this kind of cacao, it's hard to go back to anything else.
Yeah, it really is. No, I was gonna mention I had been to Ecuador in 2018. Very different situation down there at that time, and yeah, very easy to get around. Like great
It was the most
country.
peaceful. It was the most peaceful of places until very recently.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and then as well, they use the U.S. dollar, which makes it very easy as a traveler. So, yeah, it's a shame, and it's really sad to hear that. But I'm glad that things are hopefully turning a corner and getting a little bit better. And
They've also
you're
invited the Americans back to set up their base again.
I mean, yeah, that kind of makes sense at this point. But okay, well, thank you for doing that. And I wanted to also, I was just gonna say it's so sad to see kind of, we talk about the cocaine trade and the fact that cocaine as well comes from a really medicinal and great plant as well, the coca leaf,
A
which
genuine
is
superfood and of the highest order. Yep.
I tell people all the time, and they kind of freak out when I tell them that I would chew coca leaves all the time when I was in South America. It helped so much when you're hiking. It makes you feel like you're energized for the entire day, but like a sustained energy, not a crazy wired energy. And then as well, I wasn't super hungry. I could go long distances without drinking water, which is probably not a good thing, especially for altitude sickness. But it's incredible. And so, given the opportunity, would you formulate a chocolate with some coca leaves, but like in the truest sense, not obviously cocaine?
If I could do it without going to jail, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What were some of the benefits you noticed from coca leaves?
So I have a minimal personal experience consuming it. Um, but definitely the sustained energy. One really unique factor about it is that amongst green leafy plants, it's a rare one that actually contains omega-3 essential fatty acids, which is
Whoa.
basically unheard of amongst green leaves. And the other thing that people have to understand about it is that it takes a huge amount, like imagine like 7 trash bags full of coca leaves to make a line of cocaine. And so
Yeah.
you're consuming such a small little thing in a huge quantity. And as with anything, dosage is a key factor, whether we're talking about the amount of time you spend in the sauna, the right amount of chocolate to eat, or what you're going to do with a coca leaf, or even drinking water. If you drink the right amount of water, well, pretty much everybody is going to agree that it's healthy for you. I know a couple of people who will say you should minimize your water consumption. I'm not so sure about that though. But on the other hand, if you drink 10 gallons a day, you're not going to feel so great. Dosage with anything is key. And if your dosage of the coca leaf is so radically different from what nature designed, it's not going to go so well long term.
Yeah, you're 100% on point with that. You know, the coca leaves that I was chewing barely numbed my mouth at maximum, and there's like no major physical difference. It's literally like consuming an adaptogen. You have to tune in, maybe a little bit more noticeable, like slightly more noticeable. Because it is very nice for like if you're having a headache or something along those lines. So
Especially if
there
you're
is
going to
like a chance.
altitude, like I'm sure you were there.
It helped massively with the altitude, with headaches, which were very common for me with the altitude, and also just I needed to drink more water. That was one of the big things. But when you're chewing on coca leaves, it really just, man, I understand why people chew those and go on crazy expedition hikes, because it just sustains you. You don't feel super hungry. You're not super thirsty. You can just trek, and yeah, it's just like a very like constant energy. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm a huge fan, and yeah, super sad to see kind of where it's gone with that, but it is such as life, I guess.
We'll see what the future
Um,
brings. Maybe when AI government takes over, it'll straighten things out.
let's see what happens. It's either straightened out or down a worse path. We'll
Yeah,
see.
we'll see. We'll see.
But one more thing I wanted to mention about your chocolates that I once again appreciate is your usage of intentional adaptogens and not overdoing it. One of the things I really like is your ingredient list isn't crazy long. It's got, you know, the adaptogens you intentionally wanted in there and in a good amount as well, which I think is really important. A lot of the times it's easy to say you have something on there and then it's such a minuscule amount that you're really not going to receive that benefit. So I deeply appreciate that. And as well, using monk fruit as a sweetener as opposed to sugar. It's just really appreciate that. And yeah, I could tell, I didn't know the name of some of these adaptogens, but I knew that you were doing it with a very serious intention and outcome with it.
Thank you. Yeah, I wanted to use these chocolates as a way to introduce these adaptogens to people. And so if you have a crazy ingredient list of 30 different adaptogens, first of all, you're not putting that much of any individual one in there, which gets a little bit weird. And then nobody gets to know any of them because, okay, this crazy long list, words I'd never heard of. If you put somewhere in the range of like 4 to 6 in there, there's a chance people might actually take a closer look. That's why we put pictures of them on the back of the box, that we want people to really get to know these and maybe even start consuming them on their own. Maybe they start taking astragalus for cleaner energy, or maybe they start taking cordyceps to build that core energy reserve. And I do really think it's important that, like you said, that we put enough in there to create a real experience for somebody. Because I realize, first, a matter of personal integrity and pride, but also just from a pure business perspective, I can hype somebody up talking about it just like this and get them to buy a bar of chocolate one time. No problem, fine. But they're not going to come back if they don't have an experience, if they don't feel it, if they don't, if it's not a fully embodied experience for them. So you got to make it serious.
Yeah. Well, the other point of that is, and I notice this a lot when, so my wife does tea ceremonies, and they're all in silence. You just for 45 minutes to an hour sitting with tea, drinking bowls and bowls of tea, and just sitting with inner reflections and the tea itself. And the thing that I really love about that whole practice, aside from just like the meditation of it, but is the fact that you're sitting with a single ingredient, food, drink, whatever you want to call it, and noticing the effects that it has on the body and even like the variations in the tea. But that's something we don't do very often, which is sit with a food or herb and just that one and just deeply feel what that's doing to the body. I think that's not a common thing for us to do. And as well, like doing like the elimination diet, for example, you cut out all these foods that are trigger foods, and then you slowly reintegrate them and just notice, how is this affecting my body and my digestive system. And so when I do that with tea, it's a great opportunity to just really feel the effects of the tea. And I think with these as well, it's very specific to the ingredients that are in there and noticing the benefits of them.
Yeah, we're of one mind. You're speaking my language there. When people ask about the different adaptogens that we offer and how to try them for the first time, how to take them, I say the exact same thing. I say take a half a teaspoon of this herb, put it in like 4 ounces of hot water, stir it up, let it dissolve, sit somewhere quiet, sip it slowly. Pay attention to how you feel, pay attention to your breath, pay attention to your energy. And I liken it to a first date with that herb. You want to get to know the herbs one by one so you can understand how to relate to them. You wouldn't take somebody on a first date to a rave because it's going to be too crazy. There's too much else going on. You're not going to get to know them, right? You're going to end the night's going to be over. You're like, wow, that was nuts. But what the heck just happened? Who are you? I don't know yet. You go somewhere quiet, somewhere romantic, one-on-one, nice candlelit dinner with reishi mushroom or ashwagandha or astragalus. You come away from that really knowing what just happened and who this other person is. And then, after a while, you can have a few of them over for a party. I know we're going kind of into out of monogamy in my little my little metaphor here. It's getting a little crazy, but you get the point. Like you start off with one, and then you can get to know the others, and you go from there. Get to know them one-on-one, and then build.
Sage, you're crushing it with these examples here. Like you're managing to take everything and then just putting it in an excellent way to explain it. Yeah, hands down, that's literally it. You're spending quality time with that single ingredient and getting to know it better. So yeah, man, I appreciate all the work that you've done with this. And as well, I think it's important to note that you don't just have chocolate and cacao powder on, at addictive wellness, but you also have a lot of these adaptogens as well, which is something I really appreciate. And, now knowing your strict process with the cacao, I can only imagine it carries right on over into all these adaptogens.
Absolutely. The purity, the potency, it is something that I'm obsessed over. I want people to have the ultimate experience because beyond just any aspirations of business success, I just love these adaptogens and I want people to have amazing experiences with them and for them to share it with others and just to have as much of a positive ripple type effect. So they got to be good.
No, I appreciate all of the work that you do, and as you had mentioned earlier on in this podcast about you kind of pave the way for yourself, and you have your own experience. You slay your own dragon, and it's almost natural for you to want to relay that information. And that's largely why I started this podcast, was dealing with a lot of gastrointestinal issues. It was one of those things that I had to largely navigate on my own in terms of finding more of a health and wellness, holistic style practice to heal my body as opposed to the Western approach, which not saying that's not right for certain people. It just wasn't for me. And yeah, so the whole purpose of this podcast is like, I look back to if I was that 7-year-old kid, well, maybe a little bit older to understand this podcast, but I wanted to provide that information that I would have been seeking. And yeah, so I can tell it's the same thing with you drinking those rough smoothies and then finding a way to make it enjoyable so that everyone can just enjoy their adaptogens in a way that doesn't make them feel slightly nauseous after drinking the smoothie.
And thank you for everything that you're doing to share all this information with people and help people take steps forward in their health and their family's health.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sage. I appreciate that. And I want to also just kind of open up the floor here as we are coming to a conclusion on this podcast episode to share anything that you would love to share with people. It could be related to addictive wellness. It could be related to anything off topic. This is kind of just your opportunity. And then as well, how people can connect with you. And then I just want to quickly mention before I forget, Sage was awesome enough to provide us with a discount code. So that is going to be in the description, the show notes of today's episode. So go ahead and check that out so you can get a little thank you from Sage and try out some of his amazing chocolate. But Sage, the floor is yours.
So I would just say we've obviously mentioned a lot of different foods, a lot of different herbs, adaptogens throughout the conversation. I know it can get overwhelming for people sometimes. They're going to think, what? He just mentioned all these like 10, 12, 15 different things. Do I have to start with all of them? That's not possible. I'm just going to start one and forget it. Like, that's a nice idea, but no, not for me. But I hope you won't take that approach. What I want you to take away is you don't have to start with all of it at once. It's just a matter of picking the one thing I mentioned that was the most interesting for you. Maybe it's a bar of chocolate. Maybe it's astragalus. Maybe it's reishi mushroom. Maybe it's cacao powder. Incorporate one thing. Do that for a month. See how you feel. If it was great, awesome, keep doing it. And then maybe as you're just having that becoming a comfortable part of your daily life, maybe you add in one more new thing that also sounded interesting to you. Just start with one. You don't need to go to that rave all in the beginning. Just make it easy for yourself. And it's amazing what one new thing in your life can do. And like I had that one experience with a superfood mix when I was a kid. And look at what a ripple effect that created down the line. Just try one new thing and see where it takes you.
I like that. Definitely, we don't need to look at the entire staircase, just the step in front of us, and
There
kind of
you
take
go.
it from there. But you led me to another question I want to ask you. Sorry, but
No problem.
what would be, your top three adaptogen slash superfoods? We can put cacao in there, that you would recommend for someone who's never even dabbled in any of these things. Like, what would you recommend for them to kind of start with and go on to?
The three easiest adaptogens to start with are astragalus, turkey tail, and gynostemma because they all taste delicious. You don't have to do anything fancy. You just add it to hot water and drink it as a tea. Even somebody who has zero interest in health and no palate for healthy foods is going to enjoy this. So it's a great place to start. And beyond that, of course, cacao added to anything is going to be pretty awesome. So big fan there. But just in the adaptogen category, if you're not wanting to delve right into some of the more bitter flavors like a reishi mushroom, even though that can be such a transformational herb, astragalus, turkey tail mushroom, and gynostemma or three amazing starting points.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a good point. Is some of them can taste a little rough, so that's a good place to
I've
start.
learned from my old smoothie days that you got to make it acceptable to the old taste buds.
I like that. I like that, Sage. Well, Sage, your wealth of knowledge, I appreciate you and truly appreciate the work you're doing with bringing this high quality cacao out here. And I'll continue eating your cacao hands down
Thank you so much
until.
for all your kindness and support.
Oh, absolutely. No, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate you, Sage.
My pleasure. Yeah. And for anybody who wants to find our stuff, you can check out addictedwellness.com. As Evan mentioned, we got the discount code ready to go for you guys. If you enjoyed this kind of information, you can, I'm kind of obsessed, as you can tell, and really enjoy sharing. So I've got a whole YouTube channel and Instagram page and all that at Addicted Wellness where I speak pretty endlessly about this kind of stuff and would be happy to have anybody else along for the ride. And you can even send us questions and we'll make videos in response to your questions and have a lot of fun with it.
That's awesome, Sage. Yeah, and I should have mentioned that, but all of Sage's contact information and where you can connect will be in the description in the show notes. So please check them out. I just recently started connecting with you on Instagram, and you got some great quality content. Obviously, like I said, you have a ton of knowledge on it also. Yeah, please check it out. Check out the description. It'll all be down in there. And yeah, thank you so much, Sage, for all the work that you do.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
All righty, everyone. We'll catch you on the next one.